This is the meeting of House Ways and Means Full Committee. Chair calls House Bill 390, Representative Mayo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I rise again and come before you with a substitute for House Bill 390. And again, thank you for all of your support and insightful input to help this become a better bill. House Bill 390 would provide an exemption to the ceiling on local sales and use taxes, which may be levied by a political subdivision. In this case, it's narrowly drafted to apply to DeKalb County, and Section 1 indicates that it would be for counties with both a MARTA and a host tax. And in Section 2, you'll see we've added some language so that our cities will have a lot more input and influence in coming together with the county. And the substitute is going to add the language here that shares that says the cities and the county must both agree, and the intergovernmental agreement must be drafted and agreed upon before the SPLOST is levied or before the referendum is held. And without the consent of all of the municipalities within the county, it's not going to happen. So it's all or none. Previous versions of the bill allowed for an opt-out provision, which would have caused some uniformity concerns, and portions of the county may be at one rate while cities within the county could be at another. But this will force everyone to the table to find an agreement that's amenable to all parties, all municipalities, as well as the county, and that agreement must be agreed upon before the referendum can take place. So that's the section on lines 64 through 68. And finally, if you turn to page 3 of the bill on starting with line 121, this is the section that creates the or provides the language that says the SPLOST is for transportation and infrastructure projects and shall be for a period of 10 years, at which time we would, DeKalb County would have to come back to the General Assembly for a joint resolution if it was to be extended, but it sunsets after 10 years and is limited to fund transportation and infrastructure projects. And ask for your favorable consideration, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Questions of the author of the bill by members of this committee? Representative Martin. I'm sorry, Representative Powell.
On line 122, your intention is not to do transportation and other infrastructure. Your intention is transportation-related infrastructure projects. Is that not true?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay.
Further questions of the author of the bill by any member of this committee? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? Motion do pass and second. All those in favor? I'm sorry, excuse me. Representative Powell has another question.
And Mr. Chairman, I know that the chair likes to have any kind of amendments, but I think this is a very small technical amendment. But just to make sure that we aren't talking about separate transportation and other infrastructure projects, I would like to amend between and infrastructure on line 122 the word related infrastructure projects, the word related, to make sure that it's related to the transportation
You
projects.
recognize for making the motion to do that?
Yes, sir. I would like to make a motion to amend.
You heard the proposed amendment, Representative Powell. Is there a second? Is all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Thank you. Now we are on the bill itself. We need a motion on House Bill 390. A motion has been made and to do pass. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Bill passes. Thank you,
Thank you.
House Bill 348, Representative Parsons.
House Bill 348, from, is this working? Okay. It's LC 344193S. Is that correct?
93S, yes, sir.
Okay. This bill would provide an income tax credit for the purchase of, there are two classes of commercial vehicles that use alternative fuels. And it would provide a tax credit of $2,500 for the purchase of what's defined in the bill as a alternative fuel heavy-duty vehicle. That's the weight classification is specified in the bill, and that's a vehicle that operates on 90% or more of alternative fuel and 10% less of gasoline or diesel. It would provide a tax credit of $12,000 for what is defined in the bill as a medium duty vehicle, and that's a new commercial vehicle with a gross vehicle weight of 8,500 pounds or more, or less than what is defined as a large vehicle, 26,001 pounds, that is solely fueled by an alternative fuel and that is produced by an original equipment manufacturer. I've worked extensively with the governor's office on this, and also Chairman Chanel. I appreciate all the help. The amount of money that would be available for this tax credit would be $2.5 million a year. We've worked on that and looked at that and brought it down tremendous amount since the bill was first introduced, and it would be in effect for 2 years, the fiscal year 2016 and fiscal year 2017. And this is a bill that will help kickstart the purchase of some alternative fueled commercial sized vehicles, and also will help with attainment goals for air quality in the state of Georgia, help with health issues for children, people with asthma. I mean, all those things that can be helped by the use of alternative fuels, fuels other than gasoline and diesel. Another thing we've worked on the bill is to limit to keep one company or one entity from going in and getting all the tax credits. That's been limited to, let's see, what did we end up limiting that to? $250,000. Worked on it a lot. Actually, this is the third year I've worked on this bill, and I appreciate all the help from, here again, not only Chairman Chanel, but Chairman Powell and members of the committee, members of the Income Tax Subcommittee. Be glad to answer any questions.
Representative Howson has a question.
I've got 2 or 3 questions. Where does it say that $2.5 million that you're going to put in the bill?
That is on page 2. No, it's not on page 2. Just one second.
I see it. Okay. All right. The next question. Are you familiar with Georgia Go?
I beg your pardon?
The credit you can get by giving money to scholarships.
I'm somewhat familiar with it.
Okay.
I think that was Chairman Earhart's
this year
bill.
when I went to give something to Georgia Go, it was already filled by January 22nd of this year for 2014, and you couldn't give. $250,000 seems like a lot for one person if you just got $2 million.
Well, what we're trying to do is limit it. It's these trucks, especially these heavy-duty vehicles, are to purchase the ones that use the alternative fuels are incredibly expensive. Here again, I've tried to answer the question before why they're so expensive. I don't know why they are, but they are, and and this is aimed at fleets. So there are fleets that would want to buy try to get them on the road and try to.
Whose fleets are we talking? What kind of fleets are we talking about? Who would have this?
It would depend on the. It would depend on whether it's a medium size or medium duty or the heavy duty. But you're talking about fleets, and I don't know who uses exactly what vehicles. But you're talking about fleets like garbage trucks, over the road trucks, delivery trucks. I mean, just runs the gamut for those weight classes.
Okay, I just was disappointed that I couldn't give to Georgia Gold, and it was, it seems like it filled up real full, and hey,
Yeah.
this to.
Well, I'm just glad to, I'm glad to have the opportunity to bring the bill and move it forward, hopefully. And I wish that the pot would be a lot larger, but we have to start somewhere, and I think it's a real good goal to do this bill right here. So, thank you for the question.
Representative Martin has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Parsons, to the $250,000, when we had talked previously, I think you intimated to me that the reason for it needed to be that much is not only conversion of the vehicles had to happen, but it couldn't just be a vehicle within various fleets, because there is some expenses that are not to putting the fueling station in. So I think you sort of led me to think that the reason it needed to be at least $250,000 for one person to make it worthwhile for them to convert that many, right?
Right.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I was not following your question correctly, but that is correct.
To make it sort of a critical mass in order that they could defer the expense of the fueling station.
Good question, and that's exactly correct.
Any further questions of the committee of the author of the bill? What is your pleasure? Move do pass in a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Bill passes. Thank you. House Bill 128, Representative Peak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This bill was affectionately known as the Renaissance Act. It was originally a bill that provided for a large, significant annual tax credit for investment in downtown districts all over our state. We've had a lot of work on it, and we've tried to come up with a solution that is not as fiscal, doesn't have as large a fiscal impact, but still gets to the heart of the matter, which is encouraging development in our downtown districts. And so what we've basically done is set up a fund called the Georgia Downtown Renaissance Fund, a revolving loan fund that will be held at the Department of Community Affairs. The structure will be set up there, and the commissioner of the Community Affairs will serve as the director of the fund, decide where funds are appropriated, and in effect set up this fund for investors who would like the low interest loans and do development in downtown districts. There's no appropriation in this bill. That's why there's not a fiscal note. It has a maximum of $5 million per year for up to 4 years, not to exceed $20 million, but it will all be subject to appropriation based on this body's, the will of this body. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the bill.
You heard the author's explanation of the bill. Any questions, members of the committee? Not, what's the pleasure? Motion to pass with a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
House Bill 69, Representative Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 69 is a bill that was in the committee last year. In fact, it passed and was on the House floor when we had to withdraw it because of a verbiage error. But what House Bill 69 deals with is redemption of property that has been bought on the courthouse steps. And the ultimate purpose of the bill is to protect the purchaser of that property. And what happens is when you buy at a tax sale, you don't own the property outright for 1 year, and during that time there are if it's part of a homeowners association, those fees will accrue, and the courts have ruled that you are responsible. If you bought that, you're responsible for paying those homeowners association dues. And so what this bill would do is says that if you buy a property at a tax sale and somebody and the original owner redeems it, you not only get your money back for what you paid as far as the property is concerned, but if you had to pay homeowners association dues, you get those back as well. And again, that bill was all the way on the House floor last year, and we had to pull it back because of a verbiage error, and that has been corrected.
Question to the author, members of this committee. Hearing none, what's the pleasure? We do pass it along with a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. The bill passes. Thank you.
Thank you for your patience, Mr. Chairman.
House Bill 933, Representative Atwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I bring for your favorable consideration House Bill 933. An exemption on sales and use tax on aviation parts has been in effect since initially passed by the legislature and signed by the governor in 2007. It's been extended 3 times by the legislature. It expires July 1st, 2015, unless the sunset provision is removed. This bill removes the sunset provision. The exemption, it helps Georgia businesses, and we've testified in detail before the subcommittees with comparable businesses in other states, most principally South Carolina and Florida, that have a sales tax exemption. It only applies to aircraft that fly in from out of state to be repaired in Georgia. It's not a tax break for the companies themselves. They pass it on to the aircraft that fly in to be repaired. It's about helping the Georgia companies compete, especially in the environment that they find, because by their very nature, airplanes are in fact mobile. I might point out to you that in 2009 and 2010, the Special Counsel on Tax Reform and Fairness reviewed all of our tax incentives. They recommended that many of them be eliminated, except this one. They did say that they thought it should be made permanent. The governor's competitive initiatives also recommended that the sunset provision on this incentive be removed. The Georgia Chamber of Commerce supports this bill, is my understanding. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions the full committee might have.
Representative Atwood, I think what the council did was recommend to do away with all tax returns except this one.
Yes, yes, sir. I think that is. I appreciate the chair pointing that out. I'll have to make a note of it.
Just thought I'd be helpful to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I need all the help I can get, Mr. Chairman.
The majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Atwood, we spoke earlier today, and we met with a lot of the fiscal people, and we received a fiscal note either last evening or this morning about this bill that indicated to us that obviously there would be no fiscal impact on the sales tax exemption in 15, since it was already exempt under a 2-year sunsetted exemption we had granted last year.
Yes, sir.
But beginning in 16, their estimate for state sales tax loss to the budget would be something over $16 million.
Yes, sir.
And when we looked at that, that was kind of a shocking number, because prior to that estimate, just 1 year ago, the exact same people estimated for the year 2014, when we did the exemption, that it would have been $5 million, which the 16 obviously is a little more than 3 times that just 2 years later, which I don't know about you, but kind of shocked me a little bit that we had that much disparity in those two estimates.
It did, yes.
Or projections. But as we dug into it a little bit deeper, we were told that the first estimate had only to do with one of Georgia's single largest, most prosperous employer, known as Gulfstream, in the Savannah area. And again, I want to make sure I understand you in that we're only talking about exemption of parts and equipment used for repairs.
That's
We're
correct.
not talking about their mammoth manufacturing operation, which is a jillion times more than this. At their plant where they employ like 14,000 people in Savannah. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about aircraft, in their case, that they manufactured prior that are headquartered somewhere other than Georgia. So they're not taxable in Georgia. When they fly here for repairs, because they can fly to South Carolina or they can fly to Florida, less than 30 miles from state lines where Gulfstream already has facilities, they can buy these parts tax exempt, where in Georgia, if we don't do that, they run the risk of not being able to do that. Isn't all of that true?
That's correct, Mr. Leader.
And didn't we further talk to the analysis people and try to dig into, once we figured out why it went from 5 to 16 after the relief that came over us there, we were also trying to figure out why this was the only exemption that the esteemed tax council recommended to keep. And as we began to analyze things, we figured it this way. And again, we're only talking about repairs. And just in my very simplistic numbers, using the round number of $16 million, if that is 4%, and that's what the state sales tax rate is, if $16 million equals 4% of something, that must mean they estimated that we're going to be selling in the state of Georgia for all of these aircraft repair operations. Again, only for aircraft that come here out of Georgia. All the Georgia ones, unfortunately, are taxable and pay a sales tax in Georgia, but all the ones coming in, if it's 16 million is 4% of this number, the number is $400 million.
That's correct, Leader.
So we're projecting that we're going to sell in Georgia $400 million of parts each year going forward, and that's going to increase. 16 is the low, and then we go up. Well, the other thing that instantly comes to mind is that it takes mechanics and artisans to make these repairs. And we found out that in this industry, well over half of anybody's full repair bill is for labor and not parts, which has never been taxable.
That's correct.
So it's logical to make the assumption that on a very conservative basis that we're also selling $400 million worth of services if you assume we're selling $400 million worth of parts. And if those services were subjected to Georgia's top income tax rate, which is 6%, that would generate for the Georgia revenue base $24 million. So if we lose 16 to get 24 million, that kind of sounds like to me to be a pretty good deal. I wish I could make some investments that returned 37% on my dollar, and I think there was really no good argument against that very fundamental logic. Now, there are a lot of variables, but since we made that logic to the fiscal analysis people, also Dr. Bushman, a PhD, has analyzed this whole issue from a completely far more technical aspect than I just did for the entire industry statewide. And his estimate is that by giving this $16 million exemption, we will actually generate 28 million, not 24, in personal income tax revenue from the labor component of this. And is it not true that if these companies, especially the ones like Gulfstream, again, only for repairs, if they decided just to move 30 miles down to Florida, all of these 1,500 or so people, mechanics and all that they employ to do repairs, would also move to Florida. Then they would not there be subject to Georgia income tax, or they would move to South Carolina where they have an exemption on parts, which we compete with every day in the state of Georgia. They would not be subject to a Georgia income tax there. And if we don't grant this exemption, we'll actually be losing, arguably, if you believe Dr. Bushman or me and my very fundamental logic, either $8 or $12 million, and asking well over 1,000 very well-employed Georgians to leave our state, which is exactly the kind of people that we try to keep here to create good, prosperous jobs. Is all that kind of a true statement?
That's exactly true, Leader. That's that estimate by Dr. Bushman, and I thank him for doing that. It takes a very conservative Bureau of Labor Statistics standard of around $50,000 per year for each job. So that's a very conservative estimate that he gave.
And lastly, in fairness, and I always am very, very conscious about our local governments and unfunded mandates and unfunded exemptions that we pass down to them. They would not receive income tax from these employees that stay in Georgia, but if you could somehow figure the ad valorem tax that is in all of their local tax base from these people living in Georgia rather than Florida and rather than South Carolina, I think that would far outweigh the local portion of this exemption as well if you were to net those two out. And this is the one time in 15 years of me being here that I've seen one of these exemptions that is absolutely quantitatively easy to justify before we do it rather than gathering facts after we do it to understand that it's a good investment and it's prudent for Georgia and Georgia taxpayers and the growth of Georgia business. However, I will pledge to you, and you can tell your constituents that are in this industry, that I intend to come back next year and watch this and look at data and make sure that we achieve these numbers with income taxes and so forth, because what we need to always be mindful of is those exemptions we grant, we can also ungrant every time we gather up here. And it's my goal that we reprove and we requantitate the fiscal efficacy of everything that we do here. And I think we owe every Georgian that sort of analysis of what we do. And I want to commend you for how well you've done that on behalf of this area. You just happen to have one of these facilities in Brunswick, I know. It means a lot to your area. And I thank you for your hard work in that regard. And I will thank you for your assistance in continuing to verify that this was the right thing to do and when to do it so that they can plan and further grow these wonderful corporate assets in our state. And with that, I have nothing else to say.
I pledge to you, Leader, that I will, and in the words of Fields of Dreams, if you pass it, I truly believe they will come.
Representative Peake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Leader O'Neill, I'm just going to kind of confirm a little bit, what you didn't include in there is the impact on auxiliary businesses that as a result of individuals that are brought into that area, employed in that area, spend money in restaurants and auto dealerships and find outstanding restaurants in those areas. Yeah, it really does have a significant impact on the local economy and our state too. That you didn't really even add into that mix. That's not included in the fiscal note as well too. So, further confirmation, this is a smart move for our state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Stevens.
Mr. Chairman, this is kind of a unique event whenever we pull a sunset off of a bill, and I think it deserves a whole lot of comment, and I hope everybody else will jump on. But we didn't even touch on the expansion of the Pratt Whitney plant in Columbus. We didn't touch on the issue of Standard Aero and others in the state. So it's not just the 800-pound gorilla that's down in Savannah and Brunswick. And I too want to follow these numbers to make sure they continue to generate what we think we're going to generate, because it's a big deal whenever we remove sunsets off of a bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions off of the bill? What's the pleasure of the committee? Move and do pass. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Bill passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
Yes, sir.
House Bill 922, Representative Harbin.
On the bill here. House Bill 922. We're working off the substitute. I think everyone has LC 344128S. This is very simply just a tax deduction for physicians and those in the medical field who help train our residents. What's happening is we are seeing other states that are paying the physicians and others to train those physicians or the residents, and the out-of-state or the Caribbean
offshore hospitals are doing the same thing. This is just something to try to encourage our local physicians to help in the training so that we can grow our physician workforce here in the state of Georgia. It is a $1,000 deduction, and if you look at your fiscal note, is a total of $250,000 impact to the budget.
Questions of the author of the bill? What's your pleasure? Move to pass. A second.
Second.
Do pass a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. The bill passes. House Bill 954, Representative Harrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 954, this is a committee substitute, LC 344191S. What this seeks to do is it has the tax assessor take into consideration rent limitations on those affordable housing projects that are funded partially through Georgia Housing tax credits only. The tax assessors and those representing the affordable housing have worked together on this substitute language. I believe they're all in agreement. Be glad to answer any questions.
Questions of the author of the bill by members of this committee? Seeing none, what's your pleasure? Do pass and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Thank you. House Bill 958, Representative Nimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring before you today House Bill 958. It is the substitute that we've been working off of in subcommittee. Just want to make sure everybody does have the correct copy. That's LC 344154 ECS. Is that correct? Everybody? Okay. All right. Well, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to come to you this morning. This is a tax credit and sales tax exemption bill dealing with several different areas. To start off with, we're touching the interactive gaming industry. It's a tax credit that has been in the state of Georgia at sunset, and we look to revisit that and activate it again. What we did in the bill was we put in some parameters with the help of your committee and some influence from other members in the General Assembly to tighten that language up and make sure that we were incentivizing Georgia-based companies. As you all know, in the internet world and interactive world, you can be getting a tax credit here for a company overseas, and we wanted to make sure that our tax dollars were benefiting our citizens. So what we did was we left the cap where it previously was at $25 million. That's over a 2-year period, $12.5 million per year, limited to $1.5 million per company. So we're not picking winners and losers there. We limited the cap down per company so it could be spread out over multiples. Now in that, a company that qualifies cannot draw out more than they put in payroll. So you've got to have $500,000 worth of proved payroll by an audit before you qualify for any of the tax credits. And that's going to help grow our gaming industry. We're 7th in the nation right now from the way I understand it. And as Georgia continues to grow in its competitiveness, this will help us to move forward. Very competitive paying jobs for Georgians at a very young age, somewhere in the range of $80,000 to $115,000 a year in salary. So those are the kind of jobs I'd like to see in South Georgia. We also are dealing with the food bank industry, seeking to give them a 2-year sales tax exemption on food and food ingredients for the qualified food banks in our state. We all know the great work that they do here, helping those that need and people at risk for malnutrition. We want to just try to help them make sure that they can get the adequate perishable items and proteins that they need to make sure that the people that are in need are getting what they are required. We are seeking to extend the sales tax holiday that's been in place for some time, and that also includes in the purchase of energy efficient products. And the last provision of the bill deals with the projects of regional significance that we've seen great success in the state of Georgia since we did that a couple of years ago, and that has sunset, and the bill simply seeks to revisit that and put that back in place. Mr. Chairman, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Any questions of the author of the bill by any member of this committee? Seeing none, what's your pleasure? Do pass and second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
House Bill 969, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring you House Bill 969, which is a reinstatement of a sales tax exemption for your nonprofit health centers, known as community health centers. These community health centers are 501c3, community-driven, and community-governed entities. Community health centers in Georgia are the largest safety net primary care providers in our areas that serve underserved areas. And like I mentioned to the subcommittee, for no other reason, I recommend this because these community health centers save our state's Medicaid program about $140 million a year. Be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions of the author of the bill? Representative, do you have a question? Okay. Is there any questions of the author of the bill? The chair recognizes the majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask you, as the chair, to rule to temporarily suspend your rules of amendment, or either declare an amendment that the Chairman Smith has been kind enough to offer this bill, because it's right in the same section. We've had a matter come up that is a result of legislation that we passed all the way back in 2009, dealing with a very coveted asset here in Atlanta that's now almost complete, known as the Civil Rights Museum. And we passed an exemption on all the materials to be used in that construction, and we granted to the developer of this wonderful tourist drawing facility, and for several other reasons as well. I don't mean that to sound in any way demeaning, but only complimentary. Since 2009, while this construction was going on, technically, in the exemption we granted in 2009, Mr. Chairman, we so that we could fundamentally describe the exact facility we were intending to exempt these materials used in, we made I guess, condition that it needed to be 70,000 square feet, and it has been constructed with lots of philanthropic donations from people, frankly, all over the Southeast and elsewhere. And it turns out that because of several different events and decisions made over the time, actually to make it a more efficient and better draw, that the actual square footage has been reduced to 40,000 square feet, which makes the exemption that's sort of already been granted technically not effective at this point in time, unless we can fix that with an amendment now. And Chairman Smith has been kind enough again to offer his very critical bill, since it's in that same code section, if the chair will agree to temporarily waive the rules where an amendment that Leader Abrams will explain and propose to the committee, if you're willing to, under these very extreme circumstances. And we just learned of this today. This is not something that we save for the end to trick anybody. The information came to me literally at after 2 o'clock today, and we're very late in the session, and this gives us an opportunity to fix something I think that is necessarily done, because it would certainly not reflect the intent of this General Assembly in 2009 or going forward, that this facility were to somehow be thwarted by some technicality. So with that, I would ask you to contemplate a ruling in either rule, yea or nay, as far as suspension of your rules. And if you agree to do that, then I would ask you to recognize Representative Abrams for an amendment.
And the chair does waive the rules. Representative Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Leader, for that request. And I also want to thank Chairman Smith for his willingness to let us borrow his bill for this purpose. As the Leader pointed out, the structure that is the new National Museum for Civil and Human Rights has contracted, and so it's only 40,000 square feet. And if you look at the amendment that's before you, that can demonstrate very clearly this is a last-minute issue. We would seek to amend two parts of HB 969. On line 5, we would add language that simply points out that we are adding we're adding this language regarding a civil rights museum. And then between lines 23 and 24, we would simply amend the existing code language to strike 70,000 and replace that with 40,000. That would be the sum total of the amendment, and I would ask favorable consideration of this committee.
Questions of the minority leader? So you're proposing this amendment to the members of this committee, is that correct?
I am. Yes, sir.
Members of the committee, I've seen no question. All those in favor of her motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Passes.
And if I may move to pass of House Bill 969 as amended, LC 344025.
It's a motion made and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Have we done with that, right? Representative McCall, time to wake up. Finally got to you. Sorry it was so long, sir.
How could I possibly go to sleep with the majority leader's dissertation? Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 983, the one we're working off of is a substitute created by the Sales Tax Subcommittee. The LC is 4189 ERS. There's been a lot of time put in this by the majority leader and his right arm, Brandy, and led council and all the ag groups and Chairman Roberts, England, myself. Jeremy has been real willing to make all these changes that we made. And I can go through this thing line by line and explain to you what the formal language in it is. I can do it extensive, or I can tell you that it's a good bill after all the time it's been put on it. And if you pass it, and with the amendment, will create an uptick in state and local sales tax revenue. Now, which do you want?
Chairman McCall, that is your call, your bill.
It'll create an uptick in sales tax revenue for the state and local governments. Well, wait a minute, we got to amend it if you don't mind. It's a little technical amendment on line 83 that you should have in your package. It just clears up an explanation that got a little bit confusing.
I think I know the answer to this question, but is any questions of members of this committee? Seeing none, we need to talk to you about the amendment. Is that correct? Which is a technical amendment?
I would like for you to call it that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, that's what it looked like to me.
That's a good answer. I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Representative Peake. Move and second. All in favor of the amendment, signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. The bill is amended. I assume no further questions of the author. We're voting on the bill itself as amended. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Bill passes.
Thank y'all very much.
We are done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.